this edition of Access Rhode Island. I'm the Reverend Dr. Don Anderson, Executive Minister of the Rhode Island State Council of Churches, and your host for this edition of Access Rhode Island. In this edition, we're going to be talking about payday lending and predatory lending in the state of Rhode Island. My guests today are Margot Morisseau, and Margot is the Director of Community Building at NeighborWorks in Blackstone Valley. Then the Reverend Hirson Gonzalez, who's Senior Pastor at Calvary Worship Center in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. And our special guest this evening is Seth Magaziner, General Treasurer for the state of Rhode Island. Welcome to you all.
Thank you, John.
We're so glad to have you here for this edition and to talk about this important subject. I'm going to ask each of you briefly to just tell a little bit about yourself and how you became engaged in this issue. Treasurer Magaziner, would you start us off?
Well, thank you, Don. Thank you for having me. I've been General Treasurer for about 2 months now. One of the things that a lot of people don't know about me, however, is that I started out my career as an elementary school teacher working in rural Louisiana in a highly impoverished community. It was that experience, the time I spent living and working there, that really got me interested in the topic of financial empowerment and financial fairness. You know, in this country and in this state, we have consumer protections in place for a whole range of products, for food and for drugs, you know, to make sure that the things that people are ingesting are safe. We need to have strong financial consumer protections as well for financial products. The financial system that we have in this country does a lot of things very well, but there's also gaps, and there are also sort of a dark side to the financial system when not properly regulated that can hurt people. So it was that experience living and working in rural Louisiana that got me interested in the topic. Unfortunately, it's not just in the rural South that this is a problem. It's also a problem right here in our backyard.
Exactly. Reverend Gonzalez?
Well, for us, and thanks, Don. Thank you so much for inviting me to this today. For me, it was my parishioners. Folks in our church started displaying a little bit of erratic behavior in their finances, even some of their giving, and we noticed that there was something a little bit off. And when I started to talk to folks about it, they told me about this issue. I borrowed money. I'm having a hard time paying it back. I've had 3 or 4 loans at this point, and we've helped them to get out of it. I didn't really understand the issue till later on when you and I spoke, and we went over to Washington. I think I'll talk about that a little bit more, but it was truly alarming to find out the type of trap people can find themselves in. Good people, working people, that all of a sudden can't pay their bills because they are indebted to this system.
So you've seen this firsthand in your own congregation.
I have quite
Great.
so.
Margot, how about you?
So I work at a community development corporation that serves Northern Rhode Island, and I get to work with all the people who live in the communities in our affordable housing. And because most of the people in our affordable housing are working families, they were targets by the payday lenders, and a payday lending store opened up right in the middle of 2 of the neighborhoods that we work in Woonsocket, and they were really targeting the working families. And we started to know that residents started getting behind on their rent and could not manage their average budget, and got caught in the debt trap of what payday loans do, and it saw families' financial well-being just spiraling out of control, and realized that we needed to stand up and do something about it.
Well, that's great. Treasurer Magaziner has a limited amount of time, but before we have to let you go, Treasurer, I wonder if you could talk about this. You're a general office holder in this state. You're concerned about our finances, about our economy as much as anyone else in our state. Could you talk a little bit about how you see this issue impacting Rhode Island and its economy and citizens?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, as you know, the majority of payday lending customers are not using payday loans for emergency needs. They're using it for help paying for fixed costs, whether it's utility bills or car payments. And so once you get in one of these debt traps, it's very difficult to get out. You take on another loan to help pay down the previous one and so on, and it becomes very costly. And not only can that be a tremendous hardship on the individual or the family involved, but think about the economic impact on the state broadly. This is an enormous transfer of wealth outside of our state from, in many cases, families who can least afford it. And it does have an economic impact for sure. If somebody is fallen victim to one of these debt traps and isn't able to make their rent payment or isn't able to make their car payment, the rest of us end up paying for that through social services. So it really is an economic imperative that we have common sense financial protections. It's an economic imperative not just for the families involved, but for the whole state, for all Rhode Island families.
Is there anything else you're concerned about here? Because I'm going to let you go in a minute, but I just wonder if there's anything else you want to say about this issue.
Well, the key is education. We have to let people know that there's a problem. We have to let people know what the solutions are. And we also have to let people know that we are an outlier compared to our neighboring states. Our neighbors have common sense regulations on payday lending. You don't see a lot of the worst case scenarios that the pro-payday lobby says will occur. They haven't occurred in Massachusetts or Connecticut or Vermont or New Hampshire or other states that do have common sense regulations. They've been able to adequately protect their citizens, and we ought to be able to do the same in Rhode Island.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this work.
Thank you. Thank you. Margot, I want to talk a little bit about the product first. We heard Reverend Gonzalez talk about how people in his congregation got caught in what was referred to as the debt trap. Can you talk a little bit about how the product works?
Sure. A payday loan is basically an advance on your paycheck. So payday loan companies, in Rhode Island, we have two national companies that are here, Check and Go and Advance America. And they open up in strip malls and very easily accessible places with bright neon signs that are very attractive with a lot of advertising. And they advertise an advance on your paycheck. So you go into one of these easily accessible storefronts and you write them out a check. And you post-date that check for the amount that you're borrowing plus the fees of that, of the cost of that loan. So in 13 days, if you're not back in the store to pay off that loan, they deposit that check that you wrote out to the store. I've heard cases of them depositing the check up to 3 times a day, 4 times a day. And generally what happens is it's not just the cost of the loan, it's the cost of the overdraft and bank fees that are added on top of the cost of the loan. And so what happens is people knowing that they're going to incur these fees will go out and reborrow the same money that they borrowed 13 days ago. And that is where the debt trap comes into. So people are reborrowing the same amount over and over, and the average is 8 times. So that money ends up being very expensive to borrow.
Right. And when you think about the fact that some people probably do pay it back in 1 or 2 payments, that average of 8, there's people out there that are circulating this 12, 15 times a year as part of this. And the rate for a payday loan is what in Rhode Island?
If you take out a loan for the full 13 days, it's actually 280%, but it's between 260 and 280%. Depending on the amount that you borrow. So it's astronomically high.
So we heard that right, between 260 and 280%.
Yes.
That is amazing.
And that's absolutely legal in Rhode Island.
That's absolutely legal in Rhode Island.
That's not with a gun.
That's right. No, this is legal stealing.
My goodness.
It's, Pastor, historically, religious traditions have been concerned about the issue of usury and about taking advantage of other people. I wonder if, just from a faith perspective, you could talk a little bit about, I understand the practical concerns, but
Sure.
how about from the faith perspective and philosophical perspective about your concerns about this type of thing going on in our society?
Sure, great question. Well, first I'll say we're not against folks earning an honest living. Companies that want to deal and lend money at a reasonable rate, we're all for that. What we have an issue with is targeting poor people and building and making hundreds and millions of dollars on the backs of the working poor. And I we find that not only is that my language anti-biblical, but it's just immoral. There's a wrongness to it that you don't have to be a believer to feel and to understand and to see, to specifically target. In Woonsocket, I think we have more in our little city than in any other city in the state. And we're finding that they certainly are targeting folks that are hurting. And it makes sense. They'll say, well, who else is going to lend to them? The banks won't lend to them. And that's a good point. There are banks that won't lend to this population. Their credit's been ruined. But to take this step and to go after this population with this unreasonable amount of interest is just outright wrong. And I just can't see how the local government or federal government is sort of looking the other way on this. It's just not right.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because the federal government, for example, has taken a stand when it comes to military personnel.
Right, that's right.
There were, some of you, if you've ever been to a military base, right outside the gates of a military base are every kind of way conceivable to try and drain money away from our military personnel. And what was outside all of these military bases was payday lending stores. And so we would have men and women abroad serving their country and having letters and calls from back home having trouble with debt because of these payday lenders. And it was such a problem that the Pentagon actually came to the United States Congress and said, you've got to fix this. Wow. So Congress passed a law that said in order to loan to military personnel, you can't charge more than 36% interest. Right. And that type of thing is good for our military personnel. My feeling is if it's good enough for our military personnel, shouldn't it be good for everybody that's in our community? So Margot, talk to me a little about the payday lending reform movement. So you became aware of this 4 or 5 years ago, and now, and then you became engaged with others. Talk a little bit about the reform movement.
Sure. So first, I wanted to say Senator Reid, our very own Senator Reid, was one of the leading people for the military loan act.
Absolutely.
And he really has been a champion. But we also need a lot of work done in Rhode Island. And thankfully, Treasurer Magaziner has been on board with us for years before he was even a treasurer. So we're thankful for his and Governor Raimondo's support on this issue. So we started to notice that there was an issue about 5 years ago, and I'm sure it was an issue way before then, but we decided to organize and take a stand. So nonprofit organizations who were working in the communities through the financial opportunity centers, who were providing financial assistance, kind of all came together. But we also worked with other nonprofit organizations that were serving communities. Then we reached out to the faith-based sector, the unions, there's business people, there's just neighbors on board with the coalition who are concerned. So our coalition over the past 5 years has grown to nearly 100 people, over 50 organizations that are dedicated to working on this issue. So really in the beginning, we thought this was going to be an easy fix. We had a champion with Representative Ferry and really thought that we were going to be able to solve this in 1 year. But we were sadly mistaken because we didn't realize the powerful lobbyists that were working against us on the other side for the payday lenders. So there's been many trials and tribulations over the past years where we thought that we might get meaningful reform passed. And at the very end, the 11th hour, at the end of the session, we realized that all of our hopes for meaningful reform have died. So, again, this year, we're up against very powerful lobbyists, and sometimes personal relationships and personal interest take precedent over good policy. And really what this payday lending reform issue is it's good policy. It's good for Rhode Island. Treasurer Magaziner talked about the economic drain on our state. Rhode Island loses $3.1 million.
So let's stop there for a second. Let's hear that number again.
$3.1 million leave Rhode Island every year through the payday lending industry.
Wow. Yeah. And that is, the kind of thing that we see happening. And the payday lending reform is calling for a bill that would simply eliminate the exemption. These payday lenders operate under an exemption to the usury laws that says they can charge 260% interest.
Does anybody
so we
know
would
how
take
that
away
happened?
that.
How did they get the exemption? What governing body allowed that? Do we know how that happened?
We do. We have a path of how this has happened.
Goodness.
So it was about 2006 where they got the special carve out from our state's small lending laws. So our state already has on the books that all loans in the state of Rhode Island can charge no more than 36%.
That's what we want.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. And what happened is the payday lenders got a special carve out from that law and got licensed under check cashers. So they're actually legalized loan sharks
Wow.
under the check cashing statute.
That's so.
Yep. And I will tell you this, I've spoken to legislators who were in the legislature then, and there's a lot of bills that go up before the legislature, and if you've ever heard some of these payday lenders talk about this product, they sound like they're a mission organization helping people.
Well,
I mean, they make it sound so good.
That's the story of the people of my church. When I spoke to them, they mentioned the person that's lending their money by name. No, they're my friend, Pastor. They wouldn't hurt me, And I started to explain what the math was, because some folks just haven't sat down to do. They just borrow, and they don't. Some folks don't itemize and they don't budget.
Huh?
They're just living and they're sort of spending and borrowing. And when I was able to show them what was happening, they were betrayed. They felt so betrayed. How could she? They bet my children. They seem like they're my friends. They truly befriend these folks.
Oh yes.
At the personal level, and I don't know how deep this goes. If the people at the sort of kiosk know all of what's going on, but they certainly do build these personal relationships, and they use the words like, "Don't worry, we're here for you.
That's
Yep.
right.
We're here for you. We'll help you."
That's right.
And that's what happened with the legislature. They got bamboozled, and once it's in, it's a difficult thing to change. One of the partners I know in the payday lending reform is AARP, and I remember, I believe it was almost 2 years ago now, not quite, but the cover feature article and on the cover of the AARP magazine was all about payday lending and how it takes advantage of seniors. Pastor, you have describe for us a little bit about the unique situation you have in Woonsocket, because you have a few more payday lending stores than some other places.
It is Woonsocket is sort of what I call the sparkle of the diamond of Rhode Island. We have some wonderful people, and as far as the people are concerned, I think that it's going to be tough to find better people in any other city than Woonsocket. But we're a hurting city. Our unemployment is really high there, and we're a real hard-working town. The people that work hard for what little they have, and to see that these companies have come in strategically, and they really have come in strategically, set up their little businesses with these bells and whistles. Some of them have their little fans of people right outside, just sort of calling people's attention, and just it is a travesty that so many of the people that I know in my church, since I've been made aware of this, I've spoken to different pastors, and they're alarmed. And the other thing that's really surprising to me is how few people realize what's happening.
That's right.
It really is alarming. The people that are going and borrowing, they don't know they're in a trap. They really don't realize it until it's too late, until the anaconda's already wrapped around,
and now they've got
stuck.
to keep going. Well, it's interesting now. Last week we had the President of the United States make a specific address about payday lending, and the Federal Consumer Protection Financial Protection Bureau has come out with a draft ruling. And Margaret, you are somewhat aware of that ruling. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about what's happening at the federal level, at the state level. We're working really hard to get the exemption of 260% removed and bring everybody back to 36%. But let's talk about what's happening at the federal level.
Sure, there's some really great things going on at the federal level. We're under the Director Richard Cordray. We're really lucky that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has taken an interest in predatory lending and payday lending. So they've been working on draft regulations for the past year, And last week they released what their draft regulations are, and it includes some really great things in it. They're talking about having an ability to pay your loan requirement, meaning that they actually check your credit and see what your income is to make sure that you have the ability to pay back your loan.
Just to make a clarification, that stipulation is not in effect right now. There is no one checking to see if these people are capable of paying back the loans that they're borrowing on.
All you need is a paycheck and a blank check from a checking account, and that's it.
And remember, we're not talking about an installment loan. We're talking about a balloon payment in 13 days. It's not like I'm borrowing $500 and you're going to give me 6 months to pay it off.
That's right.
You're borrowing $500 and in 13 days I have to pay back $550 total.
Yes.
So anyway, what else is happening? So let's talk federally.
Yeah. So one of the other things that they're proposing is to not be in debt for more than 90 days. We've talked to people through the coalition who are in debt with payday loan for sometimes a year, more than a year. So the CFPB is saying that they think that people should not be in debt with a payday loan more than 90 days. So that would really help. That would be a great thing to rule on. And they're also talking about having a cooling off period after the third loan. So you can't keep rolling over loans throughout the whole entire year. So that's some really meaningful reform. They're also talking about how the payday loan companies, if you don't show up to pay off your loan, they keep depositing your paycheck or your bank check. So they're depositing that bank check over and over and causing astronomical fees for people. So they're talking about limiting the deposit to twice. So after they deposit the second time, if there's no money in the account, they cannot deposit it again. So those are some of the things that would bring meaningful reform. There are, however, some loopholes, and the payday lending companies are very good at finding loopholes in these laws. Other states around the country who have enacted reform have had to go back to the legislature to come up with new policies that solve those loopholes. So there are a few loopholes with the CFPB proposal, and we're hoping that we can work with them over the next couple of months so that there are no loopholes in the ruling.
And one of the things that we can ask people to do even now is to contact our federal representatives, our senators and our federal representatives, and just let them know that you favor a strong ruling from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They hear about some things, don't hear about other things,
Right.
but I think if Rhode Islanders just express that, you don't have to get involved in all the technicalities, but just to say that you favor a very strong ruling coming from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, that would be incredibly helpful for us as we move forward.
And Reverend Anderson, social media has been amazing in this campaign with communicating with the CFPB. So anybody who's on social media can go to the hashtag #StopTheDebtTrap, and they can see the conversation that's happening from around the country, supporting the CFPB's ruling and urging them to make it a little bit better and a little bit stronger. And even Hillary Clinton was tweeting about stopping the debt trap the other day. So we have a lot of support from around the country.
It's great. And you know, this Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was started, for this very reason, because consumers, legislation that was intended to help consumers was, stood on its end and wound up hurting people a great deal. And so this regulation is a really, really important regulation. It would be great if everyone would do things because it's the right thing to do. And as you shared, Pastor, borrowing money at a fair rate of interest I wouldn't own my home if it wasn't for that. I wouldn't own my car if it wasn't for that. That's fair.
And the system is so out of whack that I can't believe that we're talking 36% is great. That's how weird this is. I mean, if I'm still looking at it through biblical standards, 36% is still usury, but it's so far better than what we currently have. I don't think anybody on my side is going to keep talking if we get 36. I mean, I think we'd be happy. crazy.
Yeah, well, and that's the silliness of it, isn't it, really? I mean, anyone, who had a reasonable business could loan money at 36% and do very nicely, thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's just when you're trying to loan to people, and as Margot pointed out, and as you made reference to this fact, that because there is not any sort of a means test about being able to pay back, we're loaning money to people who don't have the capacity to pay back. And it may appear that that's doing someone a favor, but that's not doing someone a favor. It's just taking a bad situation and making it worse. Well, we don't have a lot of time left, but I want to get to some alternatives. So, Margot, we've been really blessed here in Rhode Island with the Capital Good Fund, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about where that store is located in Woonsocket. But why don't you talk a little bit about the Capital Good Fund?
Sure. In the first few years that we were working on this, we were working on changing the law and also educating the general public about payday loans. But we kept hearing from the legislature about where are people going to go? How about the people who need these loans and the banks won't work with them? So we listened to them, and we worked with the United Way and the Capital Good Fund, and we're able to come up with a payday loan alternative. We were also successful in working with some of the credit unions. So some of the credit unions are also providing payday loan alternatives. But what the Capital Good Fund is doing is really exciting. They have an office here in Providence, and they have an office in Woonsocket. They opened up right across the street from an Advance America in Woonsocket. But really, the most exciting thing that they're doing now is they're offering the payday loan alternatives online. So people can access these loans very easily from their own living room. But Capital Good Fund doesn't just give you a loan at a lower rate. They also make sure that you are financially aware of the decisions that you're making, and they work with you on budgeting and work with you on building your wealth. So it's an all-around win-win for going to get a payday loan from the Capital Good Fund.
Right, and it's not one of these balloon payments. I mean, this is really a loan that you pay back. So is it located in a strategic place there in Woonsocket? I heard you already make some reference to that, but
I have, and if I'm being totally honest, I haven't been there yet.
Okay.
Where is it in Woonsocket?
It's on Front Street.
Oh, it is on Front Street.
719 Front Street.
That's a perfect location.
It is.
What I'm worried about, and the people in my church still haven't gotten there, so we've got to find a way to get people to know, because just because it's there doesn't mean people are finding it. Right. Are we finding it? Are you finding people that are finding it?
Yes, they've been very busy.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Yes. So people are finding it, but we need to get the word out more.
Yeah.
We always need more education in the community.
Absolutely.
That's great. Well, this is one of the important things I think that everyone needs to realize, because this is targeted at working Rhode Islanders, senior adult. Yeah. We're talking about the people who are the salt of the earth here. You talked about the people in Woonsocket being great people, and I believe that with all my whole heart. But I believe we've got a ton of great people in Rhode Island who, are just great folks, and we want to do the best for them. I want to thank you for being with us as our guest today, and so I want to thank Margot and Reverend Gonzalez. We especially want to thank Treasurer Magaziner for being with us earlier in the program, and we thank you for joining us, and just ask that you work with us, that Rhode Island might be a better place for all of us to live. Thank you.